Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel. I have a very special guest with me, Walter Kook, who's the CEO of EnergyWeb. Walter, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you today.
Thanks, Tony, for the warm welcome. And yeah, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much for having me.
Walter, I'm very intrigued by the work EnergyWeb is doing, and there's so many questions I want to ask you, but let's start with your background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I'm a Dutch citizen. I come from the Netherlands. Of course, people know Amsterdam. I've lived there, and I was born in Rotterdam. Rotterdam is a harbor city in our small country, and I studied electrical engineering way back in the 80s in Eindhoven. And yeah, I've traveled the world, but I've always lived here in the Netherlands.
Got it. And before you were working at EnergyWeb, you were at ING, NEC as well. Can you tell us a bit about your history there?
Definitely, yeah. So like I said, I studied electrical engineering. So I first had to serve for the Royal Dutch Navy. That was then still a must. And then after that, I started working in telecoms industry. So first at the Dutch Telecom, KPN. Later on, I worked for British Telecom Global Services, a large managed service company. I did some work in Vodafone Global Enterprise. I was in the board there where we launched the whole, let's say, managed mobility portfolio globally, again, for enterprise markets. And I've also worked at ING Bank and NEC, indeed, as you say. So my CV is a little bit weird. I've worked at large corporates, and then in the meantime, also had some of my smaller companies. Yeah, so I've always worked in areas where there was technology transformation in the enterprise space and then globally, basically. Yeah.
Awesome. And what made you decide to join EnergyWeb?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. So I think in 2015 or so, when I worked at ING, of course, I got to hear a little bit about blockchain and how it could disrupt the financial sector. And then I decided I don't want to miss this. I had missed the internet hype. So I started in, what was it, late 90s. I started my own company, but it was just too late, basically. And I said, I'm not going to miss this one. And then I was lucky. I got a call from one of the founding organizations, Rocky Mountain Institute, the CEO, Jules Kortenhorst, that, hey, we're having this initiative with the energy sector. We want to go launch a chain, but we really could do with somebody with your skills, because I have always, of course, launched big platforms globally and got things going. And yeah, I decided to join. And then half a year later, the CEO left and I took on that role.
Awesome. Like, congrats on that. And that's awesome. So I wanted to ask, I'm curious to everyone's first initial exposure to Bitcoin and crypto, and what was your aha moment? Like, oh, I get it, right? How did you encounter Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a funny story, actually. So like I said, at ING, we were doing a lot with robotics and AI and also fintech, new fintech. And of course, we saw blockchain in general coming, but it was still a little bit vague. And then my first Bitcoin, I was actually forced into it, believe it or not. A good friend of mine, it was in 2015. He said, Walter, you need to buy some Bitcoin. It was $600 or so. And I said, look, man, what's this? I'm not doing it. And basically, he bought it. He bought half a Bitcoin for me. And he said, when you're ready, I'll send it over to you. And this was probably in, before the halving, 2016. And then I roll into it. And in 2018, I launched my own Bitcoin node and the Lightning node, LND Lightning. So late 2018, yeah. I've even contributed some input to RTL, the Lightning node, and off I went. And it's such a fascinating area, Tony. It never stops. You read a couple of hours a day and it keeps on going. So it's brilliant. It's one of the best decisions I took. Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Well, that's a very good friend who brought you.
Yeah. I paid him back. I must be honest. I'm not that cheap. I'm Dutch, but not that cheap. So I gave him $300 for the half a Bitcoin and off I went. Yeah.
Awesome. So what do you hold in your crypto portfolio? Bitcoin, I'm assuming EnergyWeb token.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm more like, I'm not a trader. I'm an investor. So I basically hold coins that I believe in and that can fundamentally change what we're doing. Definitely EnergyWeb, of course, and Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then a couple of the challenges like Kusama, Polkadot. I know, of course, Parity Tech very well, Gavin, etc. So those tokens, and yeah, more generally, I think more the infrastructure type tokens or the ones that move into regulatory finance, so the early ones. But yeah, it's more like an investment, longer term, and then the timing is always wrong, as we all know. So I suffer from it too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So you're a hodler, like many of us.
Yes.
That's awesome. So let's talk about Energy Web. Can you give us an overview of the history of the foundation company and what's the mission?
Sure. Yeah. So Energy Web, it started late 2016 and it came to fruition early 2017. Basically, it was founded by two organizations, Rocky Mountain Institute from the United States, which is all about climate change and policy influencing and getting projects going to make the world more green. And Grid Singularity from Berlin, very close to Ethereum founders, more the technology angle. And basically they said in 2016, hey, let's really go and build this decentralized digital infrastructure for the energy sector to decarbonize the grid, as we know it, the electricity grid. But let's do it with the big boys and girls, the real big, large utilities from the energy sector. And they basically said, if we can't get more than 10 enthusiastic about this, we don't do it. If we get more than 10, we do it. And they got 12. So off they went early 2017. Then, of course, it was crypto summer. So a lot of new members joined. And then 2018, a lot of test trial sessions with the members then. And then late 2018, I joined to actually bring it live because it was a little bit of a struggle. How do we actually bring this live? Then we went live in 2019. And well, since then, we've been really narrowing our focus even further. And our mission really is to build an open source, publicly accessible infrastructure, digital, for the energy sector that helps to decarbonize the grid. So basically, no longer large coal power plants, but really how do you include all these decentralized energy assets in how you manage the grid on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. And that is certainly such a big use case and so timely with what the world is dealing with right now. I think such a great solution. So tell us about some of the companies, the energy companies that you're working with. I think you're working with some very large ones from what I saw on the website.
Oh yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I think the best for people to go to the website. So how we do it is actually very, I would say, quite special. So we're not for profit. We have our founding members are not people; they're organizations. So it's really large organizations that have founded it. Of course, we also need to pay the invoices, so we do generate cash from our memberships, and of course now the Energy Web token is accruing some value. We can also start using that asset, but it's really they fund us and we develop the open source software for them. But it's all the big parties in the US, PGM. Many more, Shell, TEPCO from Japan, Engie from France, from the Netherlands. We have Stedin, for example. We have E.ON from Germany. Volkswagen joined us. Wow. So what we're doing on the membership front is one of the changes I also implemented is you can't do the energy transition and the digitization of it on your own as sector. So the energy sector, of course, is relevant because it's a very regulated sector and we're building the infrastructure for the sector with the sector. But you also need the IoT because these devices need to communicate. So that's why we also have companies like Vodafone that joined. You need the financial sector because in the end, you want to settle in real fiat currencies or in other tokens or in the energy, if not the Energy Web token. So that's why, for example, R3 Corda joined and more to follow there. Wow. And you also need the automotive sector because electrical vehicles are basically big battery on wheels. And they are the new power storage and power suppliers of the future. And that's, for example, why recently Volkswagen also joined. So it's really those sectors that come together also in our membership. And then they're not members, but we work a lot with regulators too. Because that's, again, a big difference with probably what we do compared to others is we operate a real utility, a real application in the real world, basically. If your electrical vehicle can start to participate in the grid, by charging and giving power back, it needs to work. And in the real world, we have laws and regulation, and we need to comply with that. You had Mrs. Spears on your on earlier one. A very interesting discussion, and yeah, the regulators are there to regulate our markets. And if you want to do stuff in the real world, which we do, then that's of course also a very important stakeholder for us.
Sure, and I'm really happy to hear that you have some of the heavy hitters, Jeremy, car companies, energy companies, and surprised to hear R3 as part of that. I've been following them for years. That's very awesome. So, you mentioned the interview with Hester Pierce, and obviously regulations are different around the world. The United States, we're still waiting for very clear regulations. How's the regulations where you're based and in Europe and so forth?
So I think it's much better when it comes to clarity. And look, so for us, the world is the playground. So our members are across, I think, 23 different or 90 different time zones are validators, and even more countries, of course. It's huge. Even in Australia, we have EMO. So it's very challenging if you want to do a conference call with everybody. But the regulators are, because I have to deal with all these regulators. So we have, of course, the energy regulators, but also the financial regulators. And in Switzerland, you have FINMA. FINMA has always given very clear instructions, so you could actually manage the risks. In Singapore, so we have utility status there. We have utility status also in Singapore. We have it in other jurisdictions, also in the US. Of course, I've also visited the SEC in Washington, and that's all good too. But you do see, and it also came across again in the interview you had, is that there's still a lot of internal discussion within the SEC. And what you see in other jurisdictions, they've just said, this is how it is. And then you can actually start building a business much faster. But I'm pretty sure it's a great team at the SEC, and they're really great people, normal people like you and I, that want to do the good thing. And we had a very good discussions there. So it perhaps takes a little bit more time in the US, but I think that clarity will come there too. No problem.
Sure. And on a note, with the token, I'm assuming you're waiting for that clarity before the Energy Web token is available in US markets, exchanges?
No, it's available. So we had, it's just Kraken decided not to make it available on their exchange yet, but we'll see how that evolves. But no, we already last year, March, we had enough comfort. Of course, we have a good legal counsel in the US. And after our discussion with the SEC, we were very comfortable that we could also go ahead there. We have a lot of US members, so we wanted that clarity and saying, hey, can we actually launch here? So we proactively engaged, and not just with the SEC, with all the regulators. Before we enter a market or before we launch a new initiative, we always make sure that we stay within the legal boundaries, again, in all the jurisdictions. But of course, US, we have a lot of US members. So it was very, we're listed on Bitmart, and US people can buy and sell our Energy Web tokens there. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see it on eventually on Kraken and possibly other exchanges as well. So the Energy Web token has been performing well. I noticed you have a staking component. Can you tell us about that? Yes.
What we I need to go a little bit into our architecture of how we've built the infrastructure. So basically, at the base layer, we have a blockchain, the Energy Web chain, and that chain behaves like Ethereum. It's a native chain. So the Energy Web token is a native token, like ETH is on Ethereum. That's the same function Energy Web token has on our chain. The chain, of course, was developed by Parity Tech, by Kevin Woods, so he knew what he was talking about. But the consensus mechanism we use is a proof of authority mechanism. We obviously did not want to use proof of work because that involves a lot of energy usage, and we're actually trying to build an infrastructure that reduces carbon, so that would not be very smart. So the big brands, we have around 40 validators or so. So the big companies, Vodafone, Shell, they're all, even a university, they all are validators in a blockchain. They basically put their brand at risk. So that is what we call the trust layer. And in our architecture, the blockchain provides the trust, because these companies are, of course, not going to mess around with the integrity of the chain. Then on top of that blockchain, we have what we call the utility layer. And that's where we've built all the services that actually make the use case in the energy sector really work well. And I can talk a little bit more about these use cases, but that utility layer is basically a services layer. So where utility services run, like messaging, or like access to storage, or name service, or key management services. And those services, for them to work in the enterprise space that we operate in, of course, need to come with a guarantee of service.
Right.
So the challenge, because if you are running a grid in the US, in California, or in Japan, then you can't say, oh, sorry, my nodes is down, you can't switch on the light. And so you need to make sure that the services that are operating there guarantee a certain service level. And that's very normal. I've worked 30 years across the world. That's very normal in the business, service level agreements. However, all these service level agreements are very well managed by a central authority, by a company like what I did at Vodafone or British Telecom, or what Verizon Business does, or IBM. They provide a managed service to a company. And of course, in a decentralized world, you don't want to introduce a middleman that provides that managed service, because they have this beautiful decentralized environment, and then there's one party in between that is still, that you have to trust. So what we said is, let's go and build a service operations that is decentralized, but can guarantee a service level to these large energy utilities, so they can also be sure that when they are going to operationalize all this in their grids, that it actually is available, has the right latency, etc. And that's where we use staking. So for those service providers to guarantee the service, they need to put some energy web tokens in escrow. And if they don't live up to the service levels, then they get slashed. And the customers, then the users will pay for those services like they do now. They pay Amazon a certain amount of money for availability of service. And that's what you then do to the decentralized environment. So that's where we've introduced the staking mechanism.
Oh, I love it. So to confirm, let's say if I hold the energy web token, would I be able to stake?
Yeah. So we have three parties. We have, of course, the customers of the services, typically the grid operators. We have the providers of the service, so that makes sure that the service is available, and that needs to be legal entities. And then we have patrons, and a patron could be you as a token holder that actually stakes with a service provider, similar to how Polkadot does it with nominators and providers. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. Well, I need to look into that for sure.
Yes. Yeah, go to our wiki or to our Medium. It's we already have a couple of good articles, and we'll come with more demos, etc. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll definitely link to that. Put the links in the description of the video and podcast, everybody, so you can check that out. So there was news of Energy Web partnered with Ripple to help them decarbonize the XRP ledger, if I'm saying that correctly. Can you tell us about how this partnership came about and the work you did there? Yeah,
of course. Yeah, so if you look at what are the big use cases we actually see emerging in the energy sector, that probably it comes down to, at the highest level, to three really big trends that we see. And then I'll stop with the last one that's relevant for the Ripple case. But there's, of course, the real opportunity that you give all these energy assets, cars, smart thermostats, heat pumps, you give them an identity, and by basically give them a digital identity on our chain, and by making that identity trustworthy to the grid operator, the grid operator can then start to include them in how they manage the flexibility markets. So, for example, if you are, I don't know if you're in California, but should you be in California, you've experienced some outages last summer, or in Texas even these days, and that all has to do with a mismatch in load, the consumption of power and the production of power. And you can imagine that if all these electrical vehicles are available, they become a really good tool for operators to manage the flexibility in the grid. Well, but for that, you need to be able to access them, trust them, etc. So a big transformative use case that we're rolling out in a lot of countries. Wow. The other big one is all around basically apart from integrating the mobility sectors into it. That's, for example, what we're doing with Volkswagen. These cars will get an identity, and then when they roll from the factory, they can just participate in grids in a trusted way. But there's also a lot of activity happening in asset tracking. So when a battery enters a country, it typically needs to be registered so that when it actually is end of life, it gets demolished in the right way. So this whole tracking of the life cycle of an energy asset is a big use case too. And we're deploying a lot of projects now where actually grid operators use our infrastructure to onboard in a cost-effective way and very secure all their assets. And the last big use case, and that's also is all around the energy certificates market. So a lot of enterprises, of course, want to voluntarily contribute to decarbonizing the world. So large companies like Google or Microsoft. Microsoft even announced they will compensate for their carbon footprint back to their origin, so to 1976 or so. And the way they do that is, of course, also procuring green energy. So Google puts wind turbines and solar next to the data centers, but you can't do that retrospectively. And that there's a whole market around renewable energy certificates that you can buy to compensate for any negative impact you've had on that. And this is also why we launched Energy Web Zero. And Energy Web Zero is basically a marketplace where you can very easily find all these renewable energy certificates that are produced around the world. A lot of our members produce them, of course, where they produce green electricity. They not only produce the electricity, but they can also produce a certificate, and that certificate can be traded. And what Ripple did is they basically said, we've estimated the power consumption of our blockchain, XRP ledger, and we're going to offset it. So first they just did a quick one and they just bought certificates to offset. What we're now working on with Energy Web Zero is actually do this in a real-time mode. So basically making sure that when a node is operating, it's clear and provable what type of energy it consumed. At that time, we also know what's the mix in the grid. If there's a lot of green in the grid, you have to offset less. And if there's a lot of coal if the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, right, the grid is less green basically, and then they offset a little bit more. So it's really an opportunity, not just for Ripple. Ripple was the first, but for any blockchain, including Bitcoin, to say, let's take the issue by the hand and let's go and decarbonize how we operate. Sure.
So have you had any interactions or partnerships with Bitcoin miners to try to see they can, be more energy friendly?
Yes, we're in quite advanced discussions with a lot of parties. Miners are the most difficult to trace. You can actually see that Bitcoin is most decentralized because it's a lot of different parties. But we're definitely on a big agenda there, and Bitcoin is one example, but we're doing it for the whole crypto sector. But yeah, also with Bitcoin, and it's also more and more relevant because I'm sure you've also noticed it, that a lot of companies are starting to use Bitcoin as a reserve asset on their balance sheet. Yep. But these same companies also have ESG objectives, so they want to make sure that what they buy is not, let's say, dirty or introducing more carbon. So a lot of these larger funds cannot, even if they want to buy another 2 billion of Bitcoin, they can't because of their objective of how it contributes to, or how it not contributes, how it violates the whole, let's say, decarbonization efforts. So I think there's also, you can see from the larger funds, the exchanges, the OTC desks, and also others that hey, what can we do to actually make sure that you can also guarantee that the Bitcoin that I'm buying is green? And that's basically what we can do with Energy Web Zero.
That's very interesting, Walter, because I've heard some folks, I think just even Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, talk about that. It's almost like blood diamonds, right? Being able to trace where does this Bitcoin come from? Where is it being mined and its history? And it seems like you guys can provide that solution of saying, here's where that Bitcoin came from. It's using renewable energy or not.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's definitely. And we, if we want to go quick, we can just follow the route that a lot of enterprises use. That's offsetting what we have with these RECs. And that's actually good because then we're putting money into the system, which will be used to build more green infrastructure. But yeah, Bitcoin, it's, look, we know where the miner is. We know the timestamp, we know the UTXO, we can trace it completely. And that's also, for anybody who's listening and is say, hey, let's go and do that, drop me an email. Because I think this is really where we as an industry can lead and demonstrate to the rest of the world, we're serious about this, let's go and do it. Yeah, and there's a lot of miners also in Bitcoin, of course, that are using green facilities like hydro or etc. But there's also a lot to be done still.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Bitcoin mining farms being built in the United States. I think supposedly the world's largest in Texas. And I hear talks of renewable energy being used here and there. So we'll see what happens. But I think you bring a great solution there, being able to say, where did this Bitcoin come from? Where was it mined? And I think that's important to a lot of companies and so forth. Now, I have to ask, because I saw an article, some folks asked me to ask you, what's the connect? Is there any connection between Elon Musk and Energy Web?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one, Tony. I get this question so often. It's amazing that, well, it's not amazing. Of course, Mr. Musk is a very impressive personality. So I can only say the following. We're talking to a lot of car manufacturers and also a lot of large Bitcoin holders, like I just said, when it comes to decarbonizing the grid. But I can only publicly talk about customers when they allow me to talk about it. And that's what you will see in press releases. So I haven't seen a press release yet from Tesla, so I can only say it's not true. But I would say, yeah, perhaps one day there will be a press release. But no, working in an enterprise sector actually also brings these obligations. We're talking large corporates. Absolutely. They're all listed, so you can't just go and randomly announce. It's all quite strict.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears a bit and talk about Bitcoin in the crypto market. You mentioned, companies adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, MicroStrategy, Tesla. What are your thoughts, given your friend told you to buy half of Bitcoin back in 2016? Bitcoin rallied to 58,000. It looks like we're going to go higher. The market's in a bull market. What are your thoughts on how things have progressed?
Yeah, I'm very bullish on Bitcoin in particular. So like I said, I'm an electrical engineer by background, and I'm also very heavily involved in the Ethereum ecosystem, of course, given the roots of Energy Web. But Bitcoin is just beautifully designed. If you are an electrical engineer, particularly from the telecom sector, this is how you would build it. It's simple, it works, it's very robust. Change management is slow by design, which is really good if you want to. So it has, from a technology perspective, I think all the aspects of being extremely reliable. Where Ethereum is a little bit more of the Wild West and the failure is great. And how can we improve? We all know that. That would be, of course, impossible if you want to become a reserve asset. So I think that piece is covered. And then what we saw happening last year, where Michael Saylor to begin, and then also others really stepping in big in saying this is what I'm going to do on my asset. And again, also the webinar he gave, what was it, end of last year, I think, or beginning of this year, I can't remember, where he had all these impressive speakers talking about how they manage the balance sheet, etc. I think it's coming. I've worked at a bank. And of course, I speak to them still often. In Switzerland, a lot of the banks now already have opened their trading desk. They are advising their customers already, take a certain percentage of your wealth into this asset class. There's no doubt, the downside risk is manageable. So I think it's a matter of time. And it becomes more and more complex. So if we had Tesla doing it, we have a lot of others doing it. We have these ETF funds starting. And if you're a CFO and you manage your portfolio, you will get questions from shareholders or your non-execs on, well, why are you not doing it? And and it becomes more and more difficult to say because if all more credible names are into it, it will just fly. So I think we're in a completely different phase now than we were over the last 5 years. Yeah.
Do you see, with the growth and the adoption of Bitcoin, potentially central banks around the globe possibly adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet? I mean, with companies doing it, it may be just a matter of time that central banks do it.
Yeah, well, in my previous job, I dealt a lot with central banks at ING, and I can confirm that they're not very fast. So I think they will definitely be the last one to adopt. I think that is very much geopolitical, and I'm not an expert there, but of course the dollar is under pressure. And I'm pretty sure that Russia or China will, when there is a new global reserve asset, it won't be the dollar, or it won't be the yen, or it won't be the ruble, because there's too much power. So can it be the Bitcoin? Yes, it can be. It could also be a basket of certain central banks coin. I think it's. I don't see central. I expect countries to buy Bitcoin? Yes, definitely, because it's well, some countries already do. I read Iran is doing it, and there's probably more doing it. But will it ever become a formal means for a central bank? I doubt, because they will give away a lot of power about monetary policies, etc. And yeah, I just don't think, knowing how bankers think, I just can't imagine they will do it. I also don't think it's needed. You know, if it's a good asset class, then perhaps they are going to put some of their backings into it, but probably not all of it. No, sure. I think they want to continue to be able to print money when they like, you know.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that they're looking to make the digital versions of their fiat.
Yeah. I think stable coins will suffer, of course, when you have all these CBDCs. Then, the stable coins will probably be regulated away, at least at the global fiat exchanges. I'm sure that will be taken over by the CBDCs, and then in your DEXs you might still have it, but I think the real assets like Bitcoin, Energy Web Token, ETH, DOT, KSM, I think they play a vital role, a utility role in the technology. So that's different, I think. Yeah.
Sure. What are your thoughts on decentralized finance, DeFi, and that movement?
Yeah, so I think it has great potential. I think what we see now is, I don't always understand. What I see is basically a new generation replicating what went wrong in 2008. So they're building a lot of stuff that nobody understands. It gets hacked, or it gets, not even hacked, but it gets exploited, which I can enjoy. But if you really look at some of the concepts, they fundamentally disrupt financial markets. So I think, and I'm involved in a couple of them, where they build DeFi type solutions, but then with regulatory approval. Yeah, and that is seriously disrupting. So when I worked at the bank, there was a lot of fintechs, but basically they were all focused on making a loan process faster, or giving loans to companies that have a risk profile, but by using some AI, you could still manage the risk. So it's basically what you do better. But what I see in DeFi is really transforming the financial sector. But I think only the regulated initiatives, or initiatives that have the approval of certain regulators or the backing of some large institutions, will really make it to the big financial world. At this moment in time, I think, but it's great potential. What I keep on saying is, if I look at where we are with crypto in general, for me, it compares to 1998 in internet. So in our country, we got email around 1994. I think Amazon is from 1997. So we're around 1998. I think that's where we are. So a lot still has to happen, I think.
Still very early. Wow.
Very early. Yeah.
Wow. There's one question I didn't ask you regarding Energy Web, which I want to make sure I get to. I know there's press releases, there's things under NDA. Any hints as to what we can possibly expect from Energy Web maybe this year that you can, give us a hint on?
hint. Yeah, well, definitely more exchanges. So I can definitely say that. Of course, the staking, we will go live. As of now, we're building it. So Q3, it should be running for the larger audience. I think you can also expect quite some large new memberships, but that is almost business as usual for us. We last year we really nailed it, where we really got big traction. So we have a lot of announcements, and like I said, we're really focusing on energy players. Very important, of course, that's where it happens. But also we want the ecosystem to be such that actually we do a full 360. So I think, yeah, those are probably the biggest ones. And we're also going to, but we need a little bit more, how shall I say it, volumes or liquidity in our token. But we definitely also want to go and set up an initiative to really accelerate new startups that seriously contribute to decarbonizing the energy sector. My general view is that it's going too slow. We're going very fast, but I think still we don't have that much time. And I think the more we can actually see being built on top of our utility layer, the faster it will be adopted by these big guys, but they need help. So we're also going to launch some initiatives to really fund new startups to build useful applications on top of our ecosystem that our members can then use.
Got it. Well, I am very excited, Walter, to see what comes this year and after as well. I love the work you guys are doing, and definitely I see such a great need for it, and even in the crypto industry and just the world as a whole. So I wanted to quickly wrap it up here with some rapid fire questions, such as, what is your favorite food?
Well, I don't really, I like so many different things. So I'm definitely into Italian, but I would say Indian food is probably my favorite. Yeah.
Awesome. Favorite musician or band?
That's Deep Purple. Yeah, definitely.
Deep Purple. Awesome. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie, I would say Monty Python. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
Monty Python. Awesome. Favorite book?
Favorite book, everybody who knows me knows this answer. It's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People of Stephen Covey. I can really recommend it for anybody to read. I
have to check that one out. And finally, when you're not at Energy Web, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
You won't believe it, but I actually code then for a hobby. Yeah, it's when I was younger, I did it in assembler and C++, and nowadays I do it in JavaScript or Python. And yeah, it's very relaxing to solve problems, code it, and then see it actually worked. So
you're a coder at heart.
At heart, yeah. Well, I've done it when I was 10, and then I didn't do it between 20. So nothing with UI. In my days, there was no UI. Right. My first computer had 1 kilobyte of RAM, but yeah, it's very rewarding. And I have such great look at Energy Web. We have so many talented people, and I learn so much from them every day. So if I'm stuck, I can talk to many people, and I'm go. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Walter, it's a pleasure chatting with you. I would love to have you back on as things progress on your end.
Great.
I see certainly some big opportunities coming up, and we'll be in contact and we can set up another conversation. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony, for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.